Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never imagined they could secretly be working against you? I always believed that my sister and I would remain close, no matter what happened in our lives. We had grown up together, shared the same home, celebrated birthdays together, and supported each other through difficult times. At least that's what I believed. My name is Emily, and at the time this story began, I was engaged to a wonderful man named Daniel. We had been together for almost 3 years. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was strong. We communicated, supported each other, and had started planning our future together. We had chosen a wedding date. We had started looking at houses. We had talked about our future family. Everything seemed to be going exactly the way I had hoped. But there was one person who never seemed completely comfortable with our happiness. My younger sister, Claire. Claire was 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we had very different personalities. I was organized and careful with money. Claire was more spontaneous. She often made decisions without thinking about the consequences. Whenever she struggled financially, I tried to help. When she needed assistance with college expenses, I helped. When she needed help with a household bill, I helped. When she needed support during a difficult month, I was there. I never kept track of every dollar. She was my sister, and I believed family should help one another. But over time, something started to change. When Daniel and I became serious, Claire began asking questions about him. How much did he earn? Did he own his home? How much money did we have saved? What kind of career did he have? At first, I thought she was simply curious. Then one evening, she asked me something that made me uncomfortable. When you and Daniel get married, are you going to stop helping me? I looked at her in surprise. Why would you ask that? He shrugged. I don't know. Things change when people get married. I told her that getting married wouldn't change the fact that she was my sister. She smiled. But there was something about that smile that stayed in my mind. A few weeks later, Daniel proposed. It was a simple proposal, but it was perfect for us. There was no huge crowd. No elaborate performance. Just the two of us at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes. I was incredibly happy. Called my parents. Then I called Claire. I expected her to be excited. Instead, there was a long silence. Finally, she said, "Congratulations." I asked her if she was okay. He said she was. I tried to ignore the strange feeling I had. Wedding planning started soon afterward. Daniel and I spent evenings discussing the guest list, the venue, and our plans for our future home. During that period, Claire became more distant. Sometimes she wouldn't respond to my messages. Other times she would suddenly appear and ask questions about Daniel. One afternoon she asked me, "Are you completely sure he's the right person for you?" I smiled and said, "Yes." She didn't say anything. Looking back, I realized that may have been the moment when she started making plans of her own. But at the time I had no idea. Then everything changed. One morning, Daniel sent me a short message. "We need to talk." I immediately called him. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. A few minutes later he called me. His voice sounded serious. "Emily, I found something." "What?" There was a pause. Then he said, "A pregnancy report." I was confused. "What pregnancy report?" He asked me whether I had been planning to tell him that I was pregnant. I told him I wasn't pregnant. He didn't respond. Instead, he sent me a photograph. It was a medical-looking document. My name appeared on it. The document claimed that I had recently received a positive pregnancy result. I stared at the screen. I knew immediately that it wasn't real. But Daniel didn't know that. Someone had apparently sent it to him. He believed it was genuine. I asked him who had sent it. He didn't want to tell me immediately. He said he needed time to understand what was happening. I begged him to meet me. Eventually he agreed. We met later that day. Daniel placed the printed document on the table. He looked hurt and confused. "Is this real?" I told him no. He asked why my name was on it. I said someone had used my personal information. He asked if there was something I hadn't told him. I told him there wasn't. I had never been unfaithful to him. There was no secret relationship. There was no pregnancy. Nothing on that document was true. But Daniel was overwhelmed. He told me he didn't know who to believe. Then he said something that broke my heart. "I don't think we should go through with the wedding right now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The wedding we had spent months planning was suddenly uncertain. I went home that evening completely devastated. For the next 2 days I kept asking myself the same question. Who would do this? Who had access to enough information to create something like that? Then I remembered something. A few months earlier, Claire had asked me for a copy of my identification document. She said she needed it for a college-related form. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. But now that memory felt important. I called Claire. She didn't answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Eventually I drove to her apartment. When she opened the door she looked surprised. I asked her directly, "Did you send Daniel that report?" She immediately said no. I asked her again. She became defensive. Why would I do something like that? I told her I didn't know. But I knew someone had done it. She told me I was overthinking everything. Then she closed the conversation and walked away. I left. But I wasn't satisfied. I contacted the medical office listed on the document. They checked their records. There was no record of my visit. There was no report matching the number. The document was not genuine. That was when I realized someone had deliberately created false information using my name. I started looking at everything around me differently. Then I remembered something else. For nearly 2 years I had been helping Claire financially. I had paid parts of her college tuition. I had helped with rent. I had covered household expenses during difficult months. I had never expected anything in return. But now I looked at my bank statements and realized just how much support I had provided. It wasn't a small amount. It was a significant portion of my savings. I had been helping because I believed I was doing the right thing. But suddenly I wondered whether Claire had started expecting that support instead of appreciating it. Then I made a difficult decision. I stopped the payments. I canceled the automatic tuition transfer. I stopped paying the household bills. I didn't send her an angry message. I didn't threaten her. I simply stopped providing financial support. The next morning my phone started ringing. Claire. I didn't answer. She called again. Then again. Finally she sent me a message. Why didn't my college payment go through? I stared at the message. For years I would have immediately fixed the problem. This time I didn't. I replied calmly. I've decided I can't continue paying your expenses. Her response came almost immediately. You can't do that. I replied, it's my decision. She called me. When I answered she sounded angry. You promised you'd help me. I said, I promised to support my sister when she needed help. I never agreed to support someone who was hurting me. There was silence. Then she asked, what are you talking about? I told her I knew about the fake report. She denied it. I told her I had contacted the medical office. She still denied everything. Then I mentioned the identification document she had asked me for. Her voice became quieter. I knew then that something was wrong. I asked her one final time. Did you send that report to Daniel? She didn't answer. That silence told me more than words could. Eventually, Claire admitted that she had sent it. I was stunned. I asked her why. Her explanation was painful. She said she had always felt like I had everything she wanted. A stable career. A loving relationship. Financial security. A future that seemed certain. She said she constantly compared her life to mine. And the more she compared, the more unhappy she became. Then she admitted that she had developed an unhealthy interest in Daniel. Not because he had encouraged her. He hadn't. Daniel had never promised her anything. Claire had simply convinced herself that if my relationship ended, she might have a chance to become part of the life I had. I couldn't believe it. You were willing to destroy our wedding because you were jealous? She began crying. She said she hadn't expected the situation to become so serious. I told her that the consequences were serious because the choices had been serious. He said she was sorry. But I needed more than an apology. I needed the truth. I asked her how she had created the document. She explained that she had used information she already had about me and had created something that looked convincing enough to make Daniel suspicious. She thought he would become angry with me. She thought our relationship would end. She believed everything would eventually settle down. Instead, she had created a situation that almost destroyed years of trust. I asked her one question. Did you ever think about what this would do to me? She didn't answer. That hurt more than anything. Because it meant she had been so focused on what she wanted that she hadn't considered the person she was hurting. I contacted Daniel again. This time I showed him everything. I explained what the medical office had confirmed. I showed him the messages. I explained what Claire had admitted. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he apologized. He told me he should have come to me first instead of assuming the worst. I told him I understood why he had been confused. But I also told him that trust works both ways. If we were going to continue our relationship, we needed to communicate better. Daniel agreed. He asked me whether I still wanted to marry him. I told him I loved him. But I also told him that we couldn't simply pretend the entire situation had never happened. So we postponed the wedding. We took time to talk. We rebuilt our trust slowly. There were difficult conversations. There were emotional moments. But eventually we realized that the relationship was worth saving. Then came the hardest conversation of all. We told our parents. My mother was shocked. My father was deeply disappointed in Claire. They asked her why she had done it. Claire cried and apologized. My father told her that mistakes can happen, but deliberately creating a false story and involving other people was a serious choice. I agreed. But I also told my parents something important. I don't want revenge. They looked at me. I just don't want to keep taking responsibility for Claire's choices. For years I had solved her problems. I had paid her bills. I had helped with college. I had protected her from difficult consequences. Maybe without realizing it, I had made it easier for her to avoid responsibility. That had to stop. Claire started managing her own finances. She found part-time work. She moved to a smaller apartment. She continued her education while learning to manage her expenses. It wasn't easy for her. But it was her responsibility. And for the first time she had to make decisions based on reality rather than expecting someone else to solve every problem. Daniel and I continued working on our relationship. Months passed. Slowly the anger faded. The fear faded. The confusion faded. Eventually we decided to set a new wedding date. It was a smaller ceremony than we had originally planned. But it felt more meaningful. We had survived something difficult. Not because we ignored it, but because we faced it honestly. Claire wasn't part of the wedding. At that point we weren't speaking. Some relatives told me I should forgive her. Others said I should completely cut her out of my life. I realized that I didn't have to choose between hatred and pretending nothing happened. I could forgive someone while still maintaining boundaries. So eventually I forgave Claire. But I didn't start paying her bills again. I didn't give her access to my personal information. And I didn't allow guilt to control my decisions. About a year after the wedding, I received a letter from Claire. I opened it carefully. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask me to solve a problem. She didn't blame anyone else. She simply apologized. She admitted that she had been jealous. She admitted that she had allowed comparison to change the way she treated me. And she admitted that she had made choices that she regretted. She said losing my financial support wasn't what hurt the most. What hurt was realizing that she had damaged the relationship between two sisters. I read the letter several times. Then I cried. Because despite everything that had happened, she was still my sister. I wasn't ready to immediately return to the relationship we once had. But I was ready to let go of the anger. I realized something important. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending someone didn't hurt you. And it doesn't mean giving someone unlimited access to your life. Sometimes forgiveness simply means choosing peace instead of carrying resentment forever. Daniel and I eventually built a stronger relationship because of what happened. We learned to communicate more openly. We learned to set boundaries. And we learned that when something serious happens, the first step should always be to talk to each other rather than immediately believing someone else's story. Looking back, I still wish the situation had never happened. I wish Claire had come to me when she was struggling. I wish she had told me she felt jealous. I wish I had recognized how unhealthy our financial arrangement had become. But I can't change the past. What I can do is learn from it. I learned that helping family is a beautiful thing, but helping someone doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your own peace. I learned that trust should be protected. I learned that communication can prevent misunderstandings from becoming disasters. And I learned that someone else's insecurity should never determine your value. The fake report almost ended my relationship. It almost destroyed my wedding plans. Created months of stress and uncertainty. But eventually the truth came out. And once the truth was known, I had a choice. I could spend the rest of my life being angry, or I could move forward. I chose to move forward. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to embarrass Claire. I didn't need to destroy her life. I simply stopped carrying responsibilities that belonged to her. And that was enough. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't revenge. Sometimes it's simply creating healthy boundaries and allowing people to experience the consequences of their own choices. If someone close to you has ever disappointed you, remember that you are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to step away. And you are allowed to rebuild your life without carrying someone else's mistakes on your shoulders. In the end, I didn't lose everything. I discovered who I could trust. I discovered how strong my relationship with Daniel could become. And most importantly, I discovered that protecting your own peace isn't selfish. Sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes, the moment you stop trying to fix everything for everyone else, is the moment your own life finally begins to move forward.